Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of the syndicated talk show, People of Distinction. The talk that gives you an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, alcoleenterprises.com for more info. Email me directly through benji@alcoleenterprises.com if you'd like to get involved with what we have going. And as always, please continue to like and follow our broadcasts. People of Distinction is an internationally syndicated show solely due to the love and support that you all continue to show. We're available across all major podcast distributors, and like I mentioned, people, if you keep following, we're going to continue to put out the content. Now sit back and strap in because we are delighted to showcase this next guest on our network. And on the line with us today, we have the impressive Walter J. Eldredge. And we're going to be discussing his incredible book, Boiling Oil, 100 Years of ExxonMobil's Refinery in Baton Rouge. Now, you're going to want to head on over to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the regular online resellers, but people, trust me when I tell you, you want to gather everything that he has in store. Man, there's no better place than his personal website, and you're going to want to check that out. That's waltereldredge.com. It's there on the screen, and it's definitely something you want to look into because in addition to this amazing book, Walter has two other ones that he's created. One is called Finding My Father's War, followed by Red Dragons, the 2nd Chemical Mortar Battalion in Korea. Again, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, waltereldredge.com. Yeah, those are the places you gotta go. And listen, man, it is an absolute pleasure to have Walter on the line. His book, Boiling Oil, it is a compelling look into an industry giant, okay? It reveals what fuels success, and I tell you, it isn't just oil, okay? It was the people who risked, who laughed, who fought together for decades. And today, we're gonna sit down, we're gonna uncover the untold stories behind this refinery's rise, the chaos that never made the reports, and the bonds that turned a small town operation into a national titan. Sit back and strap in, man. This is gonna be a good one, and I think there's going to be so much that we're gonna be able to pull from it. So you're in for a treat, and I promise you, by the time we've concluded, you're gonna run and purchase your copies. Walter, first and foremost, welcome to People of Distinction, and thank you very much for being a guest. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm fine, and thank you very much for having me.
Walter, listen, man, it is a pleasure to have you here. I think this book is remarkably compelling, very entertaining, and I think that in addition to the entertainment aspect, there's a great message there that I think can be received. Not only about this particular industry, but it goes so much larger, so much deeper than that, right? And as we were doing research in preparation for today's interview, one thing that I was able to take from it, one thing that I loved about your book was the connection amongst the workers there, right? And this particular refinery, right? It's specific to that, but it goes larger to the connection of just humanity and what can be done when we come together, man. And I think that was beautiful, and it's something that I see missing in a lot of industries and a lot of communities and a lot of aspects of today is that family dynamic, because it runs much deeper than just blood relation, man. You can formulate the unity amongst each other, and when you do, listen, man, we're powerful, right? And that type of commitment and what can be gained because of it, whew, this is something special, man, and we're looking forward to this discussion, and I think that a lot of people are going to be able to take so much from it. So let's jump right in here, Walter. Let's start at the ground floor. First and foremost, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background.
Well, I'm from Baton Rouge originally. My father came to work at the Baton Rouge Refinery right after he got out of combat in World War II. So I'm kind of a Standard Oil or an Exxon brat. I went to MIT and graduated in mechanical engineering. Mm-hmm. And I had a lot of job offers, but I found that when I was evaluating the place to work, the question I kept asking myself was, what are the people like? What would it be like to be stuck working with these guys for 10, 20, 30 years? Mm. And it dawned on me that I knew the perfect place for that, and it was Baton Rouge. I knew most of my father's contemporaries. I had dated their daughters and drunk underage beer with their sons, so I had a good read on what kind of people they were. And I decided I wasn't likely to do any better than here. Mm. And so I never regretted that. I still think it was a good decision, and I still think I made it for the right reason. Mm-hmm. The job turned out to be more technically demanding than I had anticipated, but that was okay. I had a good education. And I wound up being there for 40 years and enjoyed all of it.
Mm. Walter, my next place that I want to go, man, let's talk about inspiration, right? Because listen, your book blends humor and history and corporate culture. Well, I'm really curious about all of that. And, like I mentioned at the beginning, I think that there's so much that can be learned, so much that can be gained here from a lot of different areas. Well, I'm curious to know, man, what was that moment? What was that pivotal time for you where you thought to yourself and you were thinking like, man, I gotta put this into a book? What was that? Why did you feel inspired to write this?
I think it was probably about 1977 when I had the occasion to be in a work trailer with about 40 people. Mm-hmm. And I looked around and realized that almost everybody that I knew in that trailer, I also knew a relative of theirs that worked in the plant. And I thought, that's how interesting that so many people have a family connection. And I started keeping count and quit when I got to 400. There were an amazing amount of people that had family connections, and that got me to thinking about the culture in general and what it was like. And at some point, I decided I wanted to record that and started jotting down anecdotes and stories and things that happened to me or people told me about. And the result was Boiling Oil.
Okay. So now let's move forward into the title, Walter, okay? Listen, first and foremost, given the industry that we're talking about, boiling oil, I get the literal representation there. But let's go deeper. I mean, what does this title symbolize about the refinery's journey? And overall, man, why did you choose it to be the representation for your book?
I probably chose it in part because I like double meanings, mm-hmm. And of course, boiling oil was originally a weapon in the Middle Ages, so that just appealed to me as an extra dimension. Mm. But more than that, through 100 years, always the processing of oil into gasoline, jet fuel, lubricants has always involved a first step of boiling the oil. You have to put heat into it in order to undergo the transformations that will give you useful products. And so if you talk to a guy who started in 1910 or a guy who started in 2024, they would, early in their training, they would be acquainted with boiling oil and how we do it.
Mm-hmm. Walter, listen, man, your book is filled with some remarkable stories. Some you already started to go into, from dating some of the daughters there that you worked at, right? Some of the boss's daughters, and also some underage drinking, which, we'll keep it between you and I. But, listen, man, let's dive in to some of those stories found in the book, because that's where I want to go next, okay? Tell us maybe one or two of the more humorous or even outrageous stories that you encountered while you were there working at the refinery.
Well, I mentioned that there were a lot of relatives, and that worked very well for the company. Generally, if a boy or girl was raised by an Exxon or Standard Oil family, they got the message pretty early that that was a good place to work, and if you could get on there, you should support the organization and your coworkers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get a very, I get a very clear picture of that with one story, which was a young man who had been working there for about 2 years, and somehow or other he got himself in trouble and got 2 weeks off without pay.
Mm.
And so he went on home, and he was living with his parents, and when he got home, his mother had piled all of his stuff on the front porch, and she told him through the locked screen door that if he wasn't good enough to work for Exxon, he was not good enough to live in their house, and he could just find someplace else to live for the next 2 weeks.
Mm.
And I thought, what kind of message does that yield about the values and culture in a workplace when the parents have that attitude toward their son's good behavior?
Yeah. Yeah, listen, listen, I'm all for tough love to a certain degree. I come from a family that was what was preached in our home. Everything in moderation, of course, and that's a big one. And listen, I'm not here to weigh in on that particular circumstance, but it does bring up a great point on something where I want to go next, right? Not so much the tough love, but just the familial aspect of it. Walter, I've mentioned already that one of the things that I find really compelling about your book, not only the entertainment aspect, but the messages that can be taken. When you're talking about the work culture, when you're talking about this business, this refinery, well, you've mentioned a number of times in the book throughout our discussion here today, the culture, it was like a big family, right? There was definitely that familial culture that was established. Well, I'm curious to know, how did that culture help build and really strengthen the overall environment that you talk about in the book? Because I think that not only is that a great thing, and not only was it a great thing for this small town and for this particular refinery, but I also think that today's work culture can really learn something from that and benefit each particular business if they're able to establish that same type of culture. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Well, the culture was mutually supportive. You mentioned that it was like a family, and that's the way it was. Everybody wanted everybody else to succeed. And I say that in full knowledge of the fact that it was a highly competitive environment. The people were very good at what they did, and only the best got rewarded. But even if you weren't one that came on top and got a promotion or raise, you were happy when it happened to somebody else. You might wish it was you, but you knew it was a good guy that was being rewarded. Mm-hmm. And as far as underage beer, I remember one night in 1963 when I was cruising the streets of Baton Rouge with some high school friends, and we were drinking beer which might or might not have been underage. And it came on the radio that the DC-3 had crashed in somebody's backyard in North Baton Rouge. And we were in North Baton Rouge, so we went cruising around and couldn't find anything, and it gradually got to be a Piper Cub instead of DC-3. And then it was something smaller, Well, eventually it turned out that somebody had a hole in their backyard about a foot across, and at the bottom of it was a piece of metal about 8 inches across. Well, let's fast forward the story to about 8 or 10 years after I came to work. And everybody kept souvenirs of various jobs on their shelves in their office. And I noticed one that was a obviously broken piece of something else. And I asked the guy about it, and he said, well, that started off as a UFO. And what it was a piece of a steam-driven turbine And steam-driven turbines can operate at unbelievable speed, so they have a governor that restricts their speed. And if the governor breaks, as in this case, the wheel just speeds up until it comes apart. And in this case, it came apart and flew about 3/4 of a mile out into the community and landed in somebody's backyard and started the evening of exciting radio news. And the funny thing was that later the guy was out on that same unit and he looked up and he noticed that there was a 4-inch steel I-beam that was cut right in two. And that piece of turbine wheel had cut through 4 inches of steel and then gone 3/4 of a mile and landed in the dirt.
My goodness, people, wow. Okay, listen, that's just one story. Oh my good. Okay, Walter, this book is man, this book is just downright crazy at sometimes. Okay, people, there's so much here, from humor to just plain outrageous stories. This is one that needs to be added to your shelf. Walter, I've mentioned a number of times, I feel a lot of the benefit of this book and really what can be taken, and especially when it comes to that work dynamic, when it comes to that work culture and what can be gained from it. Well, I want to know, man, from your perspective, what is the relevance of this book today?
I think the relevance is that in writing this book and in reading it, you will learn what difference it makes in the workforce when you have mutual respect and trust. The Baton Rouge Refinery had something called the Industrial Relations Council, started in 1919 when most of the country was having a lot of labor strife. And in the refinery, it was very peaceful. They elected 2 representatives from each department. If somebody had a problem, didn't get enough overtime, got too much overtime, or they would go to management and say, look, here's the problem, and here's what we do to straighten it out. And management would listen, and they would discuss it, and they would come up with a mutually agreeable solution. And that lasted until 1955, when the government ruled that was a company-dominated union, and ruled that the workforce had to affiliate with some other form of organization. And they took a vote of the workforce, and the vote was 2,900 to 28 for continuing with the same plan. But in the government's wisdom, they didn't allow that, and they had to organize and form a union. And fortunately, the same attitude prevailed. The man who was the first president of the union was Red McDowell, and he understood that management had objectives that they had to meet, labor had objectives that they wanted to meet, and the best answer was to come as close as they could to both of them getting what they needed. And you compare that today, and there's very little understanding of the other party and what the other party needs to achieve, and almost no effort to reach a mutually satisfactory conclusion.
Well, Walter, I think that is the question, and that's the statement of the hour, right? Is finding a way to have the mutually beneficial balance between maximizing opportunity, but making sure that no one is left behind. And that's why I keep connecting it back to that family dynamic, right? That foundation where we're actually wanting to get the best for everyone, to maximize things. And listen, like you've mentioned, that there's a lot of division right now. So look, I don't know if there's necessarily an answer for this at this moment, but that's definitely something that I recognize is given here through your book, right? And it is one of the reasons why I continue to say People, this is an absolute must read.
I think I'm not being too self-serving when I say the answer to your question about what do we do about it. Well, you can start by reading my book because it tells of a time before all the divisiveness and distrust, when even then, when there were strong disagreements, there was a mutual respect and a trust that the other party was working to find something that was mutually agreeable.
Listen, I'm right there with you, Walter. I agree wholeheartedly, man. And I think that's the crux of all of this. And transitioning now, Walter, as we close out, man, because listen, there's a much longer discussion that we could have on that. But you've written 2 other books, as I've mentioned. Okay, I want to hear a little bit more about one of them. You have Finding My Father's War, also Red Dragons. Well, dealer's choice here, because you know the books better than anyone else. Choose another one of your titles. Tell us a little bit more about it so we know what to expect when we head on over and pick it up.
Well, the first book that I wrote was Finding My Father's War, and the title is somewhat self-explanatory. I went to a reunion with my father, and he sat me down with a bunch of World War II veterans, and they started telling me stories, and most of them were funny. As I continued to know these guys better, they later on told me some other stories which were not funny at all. But I did some research and found out that this was a very unique unit. There were very few units like this. And there was only one unit in the entire U.S. Army that served more days in combat than they did, and that was by a margin of 1 day. They had 511 days in combat, and the top unit had 512. And they had an esprit de corps that led them to really value the service that they rendered to the combat troops. Well, they were combat troops, but what they did was usually they were about 500 yards behind the line, and they fired heavy mortars to clear the way for attacks and to break up enemy attacks. And so they saved a lot of American lives. And basically, Finding My Father's War is the story of me going from veteran to veteran to the National Archives, and finding out what that story was, not only my father's, as it turned out, but a number of people that I got to be very good friends with, who unfortunately were all about 20, 25 years older than I was, but so they're gone now. But I was videoing an interview that I did with one of those veterans just the other day, and it was really moving to see that guy's story and remember when he first told it to me. And so I wound up with a personal connection as well as an intellectual connection as to what it was like for those veterans being in that war.
So listen, I'm going to say it again. All right, it's there on the screen. I know I don't have to, but I'm going to finalize by saying it, my man. Listen, it is Amazon. It is Barnes & Noble. It's a lot of other places. Make sure to check out his personal website. These are books that you really want to get your hands on. Because I'm telling you, it is going to make a huge difference to what you think and to the relationships that you keep around you and how far we can get together. You know where to go. Pick up your copies today. Walter, this has been a true pleasure, man. I really do mean that. An absolute honor. Thank you once again for being a guest on People of Distinction.
And thank you for inviting me and giving me a chance to spread the message.